What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Strength Coach Rants. I'm your host, Connor Lyons, and today we're going to be talking about Title IX and the new changes. All right, so welcome back. It's been a couple weeks. There's been a lot going on. If you hear some noises in the background, I have my puppy today with me at work. She's been coming up here a lot more often just because when we get busy during the summer, she's moving around a little bit. It gets pretty busy and no one's home throughout most of the day, so I want to be able to take her out and let her play around. So she comes to the gym. So if you frequent the gym, you've probably heard her. If you haven't, I'm sure you will, because she whines and she wants out and she wants to play with everybody. But if you hear some noise in the background, that's what that is. These past couple weeks, I've been fairly busy. Dropped 2 books, or I guess you could say I published 2 books. One is called The Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes, and one is called Simple Strength. If you're a strength and conditioning coach, you probably get a little bit more out of that dynamic effort method for athletes. It's a little bit more science heavy, and it's a little bit more, I guess you could say the training's a little bit more specialized, or a lot bit more specialized. And Simple Strength is a book that is actually a great read for anybody. It details the type of training that I do with the vast majority of my athletes here at the gym. It's a way to organize your training, and it's a simple yet scientific way to organize your training. They're both available on Amazon Kindle. The Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes is available on paperback. Simple Strength isn't yet because it's 3 pages too short, and I just don't have it in me to go in and add 3 pages of nonsense. But it's a very inexpensive book. It's $6. So go pick it up if you're interested. There's a lot of good information in there. If you're not, go buy it anyway. It's $6. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about Title IX and the new legislation that got, passed or signed or whatever it was. I don't know if it's on Biden's desk or he has already signed it. That goes into effect in August. That is going to change the way Title IX functions. If you don't know what Title IX is, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And we're going to talk about the new changes and how they may impact young girls playing sports. And it seems like it really has an opportunity to do that, where it could be very devastating for girls' athletics in general. But we're going to talk about that. I said a couple weeks back, we'll get a little bit more to the culture and politics, and we're starting to kind of see culture and politics and sports kind of mesh with each other when it comes to this kind of thing. So we're going to talk about it. So to start off, I'm going to talk a little bit about Title IX. And what it is, where it started, the purpose of it, what it means, what it doesn't mean, and then we're going to talk about the changes that have happened. So first off, what is Title IX? All right, well, it was a piece of legislation signed by, I think it was Nixon in 1972. It's overseeing the enforcement comes from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and basically it gave equal opportunity and protections to women when it came to educational opportunity. Now, it wasn't geared around sports, but a lot more recently it kind of is, in a lot of senses. That's all we hear about when we hear about Title IX. We don't hear about the other protections that it provides. So it basically makes it illegal to discriminate against women when it comes to educational opportunities. And believe it or not, college, middle school, high school sports are seen as educational opportunities and not just sports. So it made it so a lot of things, but the main thing was you had to give equal ability for women to play college sports as men had. It created entire women's categories for all these various sports, and it's been a very good thing. A lot of the arguments against Title IX are that women's sports don't generate revenue, but so the vast majority of men's sports. Most athletics departments are floated by football and basketball. And that's just kind of how it works, because they're the sports that make money. I love hockey, but hockey is a financial cost to the vast majority of these schools. It doesn't make a ton of money, and it costs a lot of money to fly across the country all over the place to play games. You're not playing 12 games the way they are in football. You're playing 30 some odd games, half of them on the road. You're either busing or you're flying, and that's a tremendous cost. You also don't have stadiums that hold upwards of 100,000 people. You've got arenas that are seating maybe 2,000 to 5,000 people at most. So the opportunity opportunity for revenue just isn't there. So these sports cost money. So it's a stupid argument. Most men's sports also cost money. And it's just like anything else. There are plenty of schools where women's sports actually make a good amount of money, especially the teams that go very far in the NCAA tournament, because it's all kind of revenue sharing with the NCAA. But then there are plenty of men's schools who don't make any money on the men's sports, and they're floated by basketball or men's basketball, women's basketball, and then football, obviously. So we're going to dive into all that today. So, like I said before, I'm going to be reading some notes here because I don't want to mess any of this up, and I'm not super well versed on the specifics of it, and there's like a lot of kind of important stuff in here when it comes to this, so I'll be kind of going back and forth between the screen and my notes. So again, like I said, while sports weren't the original focus, they kind of quickly became one, and especially in recent years. Athletics are considered an educational program, which is why Title IX applies. What are the consequences of not complying? Well, believe it or not, 80 to 90% of schools are seen as being in quote-unquote non-compliance. The NCAA, or the federal government rather, doesn't often audit these programs. And when they do, the penalty is to have the funds withdrawn, but that's never happened before. They've never actually even initiated a withdrawal of funds. They just say, hey, you need to fix this. And they put this label on these universities or athletics departments, I guess it would be on the university as well, as in compliance conditioned on remedying identified problems. They come in, somebody says, hey, there's an issue here. You say, okay, we'll fix that. And then the federal government's like, cool, like we got more important stuff to worry about. You'll just have this label for a while, and then we'll come back and make sure everything's fixed and you're good to go. So no school has ever lost federal funds based on not being in compliance. They're just told they have to change. There are three parts of Title IX that actually apply to athletics. So actually, in a broader sense of things, Title IX applies to every aspect of university. It's why you've seen some Title IX cases involving, sexual assault or something to that effect, because that also falls within it. There's a specific way that the university has to handle these, what's the word I'm looking for? These situations, I guess we could say, right? So if accusations is the word I was looking for. So there's a specific way the school has to handle it. There's a way that a timeline of it all goes. There are things that have to happen and things that are not allowed to happen. That's all falls under Title IX, just like athletics do. Just like regular discrimination, you weren't let in because you're a woman or whatever. Like that's Title IX. So the three parts of Title IX that apply to athletics they're called effective accommodation of student interests and abilities, right? That means participation. So you have to have equal participation opportunity. Athletic financial assistance, that would deal with scholarships, right? So there has to be, and we'll go over this a little bit more in a couple minutes here, but they have to be relatively equal. Equal treatment of benefits to the athlete. And this is a long list of things. They called it a quote-unquote laundry list of things, and it really is. This means equal benefits like equipment and supplies, scheduling of games and practice times. That means you can't schedule practice times at like 2 a.m. for the women's golf team. You can't give preference to male or female sports. Travel and daily per diem allowances. So this means that the football team goes away for 3 days. The per diem is $50 a day for the athlete. That means if the women's tennis team goes away for 3 days, it has to be $50 a day for the athlete, if that makes sense. Access to tutoring means you can't just provide tutors for the men's teams. You also have to provide them for the women's teams, which is a good thing. I think that's a very good thing. Coaching, you cannot say, well, we cannot hire a women's volleyball coach because we have to pay this, defensive coordinator's assistant on the football team. Locker rooms, they don't have to be the same, but they have to have access to, if the men's teams have access to locker rooms, the women's team need to have access to locker rooms. Practice in competitive facilities, that means like you can't have, if the men's basketball team has access to the gym, you cannot exclude the women's golf team, right? So everybody has to have access to these amenities and these facilities. Medical and training facilities and services, meaning athletic trainers, meaning training rooms, meaning you can't just let the football team use the ice baths, the volleyball team, the men's bowling team, they all need to have access to these as well. Publicity, I don't know how you police that because it's all kind of what people want to write about. So that's part of it. Recruitment of student athletes and support services. So this essentially says if you offer these things to the men, you also have to in turn offer them to the women. And I think that's fine. I don't think anybody has issue with that. And the compliance to Title IX isn't assessed like there are $500,000 for men's scholarships. There needs to be $500,000 for women's scholarships. It doesn't really work that way, although often that's kind of how people think it does. It's kind of assessed in a different way. It's a total program comparison, meaning adding up all the men's and all the women's and then doing some equation and finding out how much everybody should get. This is why there aren't women's football teams, right? It's not like a 1-for-1. It's not like we have to mirror this. If there's a men's football team, there's a women's football team. If there's a men's baseball team, there's a women's baseball team, right? It's different. There just has to be equal opportunity as the entirety of it, I guess you could say. See, the total number of participants or opportunities are what matters. That's why you see a lot of universities do away with like the men's volleyball program, but they'll maintain their women's volleyball program, or they have non-co-ed cheerleading teams because they have to maintain equal opportunity for the women as they do for the men. If you've got a football team that has 60 some odd guys on it, you've got to make those up somewhere. That's why a lot of schools also have huge women's side of track and field because the opportunity has to be there. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to give all of those women like scholarships the same as you would the men. It just means that the opportunity to play has to be there. We'll talk about scholarships in a minute. Title IX doesn't guarantee equal funds for men and women, like I said before. It's based on participation rates. So let's say a school has $1 million for financial aid for athletes, meaning scholarship money, and there are, 10,000 athletes, right? If 6,000 of those athletes are men, right, that's 60%. They get 60% of the scholarship money. That would make women 40%. They get 40% of the scholarship money, and then that gets spread out. So it's like a per capita thing, right? So the men are going to get the percentage of participants that they have of the money, and the same thing's going to happen on the women's side. So it just means you can't offer 40, or I don't know what the numbers are anymore. I think on the football team, it's something like 30 to 40, somewhere in that space, like college scholarships, and then not offer any to the women. They would also have to, because that money would have to get distributed based on participation rates, if that makes sense. I don't know, it feels like it came out pretty jumbled, but hopefully it made sense. It guarantees equal opportunity, right? So it's not mirror image programs. It's not if I have 500 male athletes, I have to have 500 female athletes. It means like the opportunity has to be there for these women to also be a part of athletics. Hopefully that makes sense. There's no requirement for teams or like what's the word? There's no requirement for teams, merely for participation opportunity. So the opportunity for women has to be there. It doesn't mean that they necessarily will fill all those slots, but the opportunity for them to be able to play has to match the opportunity for men to play sports in general. Again, this is why you see a lot of women in track and field. You see cross-country teams on the women's side of athletics be blowing up with athletes, where the men's side you might not see as many because the opportunity has to be there for them and it has to balance things out. And this hockey fell victim to this quite a ways back. It totally eradicated Division II because of Title IX, because they could not offer the same amount for women as they were for men. And this is why you see university, or Penn State University, they had $100 million donated to the hockey program in order to be able to keep the men's side so that they could fund the women's side for X amount of years until it kind of grew to the point of funding itself. So oftentimes that's why you do not see Division I hockey programs at a lot of these schools, because the numbers for the women's side aren't there, and B, the money to create a women's opportunity just isn't there. It is what it is. Often to remain compliant and kind of to go to what I just said, instead of adding women's sports, what they will do is they will just cut non-revenue generating men's sports. And it makes sense because an athletics department does have a budget and has to stay within that budget. Unlike the American government, where we can just print infinite money, you can only have so much money, right? And if it's not there, it's not there. So instead of adding women's hockey, they say we'll just get rid of men's hockey because it's not generating any revenue. And honestly, that's how it works at a lot of places. They just, if you're not making money, sorry. We've had 3 Division I men's programs that fell victim to COVID and lack of funding and not being able to generate enough money to stay afloat. And it just is what it is. It's how things work. So hopefully now you've got a little bit better understanding of how Title IX works, what it's intended to do. Next, we're going to jump into these changes that just happened either last week or, because today's Monday, it would have to have been last week. Again, like I said, I'm not sure if it's been signed yet or if it's just made it to Biden's desk, but we're going to talk about that next. All right, so now we're going to jump into these changes that have hhappened last week. Again, it just seems like this was like a decree by the Biden administration. I don't think there was any legislation passed, but we're going to look specifically at a USA Today article that kind of spells out some of this right now. All right, so updated Biden administration rules will soon affect students across the U.S. It's an article written by Kayla Jimenez. All right, so what's new? The Biden administration released a new set of rules this week, overhauling the Trump administration's Title IX rules, which gave more rights to alleged perpetrators of sexual assault and harassment. The new rules also stipulate further protections for the LGBTQ plus students, as well as parenting and pregnant students. So basically, during the Trump administration, some rules had been created that changed the way that Title IX functioned, and it gave more protections to people who have been accused. So this article calls them perpetrators of sexual assault and harassment. It's not necessarily a perpetrator, it's somebody who's been accused. So it gives more due process these people. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but, politics are going to politic. It is what it is. Some of the old rules for cases of sexual assault, they stipulated that schools only had to investigate claims that met a certain threshold of sex discrimination and were made through a formal reporting process. It also raised the bar of proof for sexual misconduct on college campuses. They prohibited investigations of cases that occurred off campus. So, there's a lot of... I don't see the issue with a lot of this, why these rules needed to be changed. There should be a process for reporting things. They should probably be relegated to things that happen on campus. I don't know how the school can be responsible or deal with something that happens off their campus just because 2 students go to school at that school. Whatever, right? But we're here to talk about the sports aspect of it. So why does the change matter? Critics argued that the Trump-era rules prevented people accused of sexual harassment, assault, or discrimination from facing repercussions. Supporters contended that the rules rightly strengthened due process protections for accused students or faculty members, right? Which I think is fair. I think there needs to be a process. I don't know the answer to how to deal with things like sexual assault allegations. I'm not smart enough to figure that out, but there does need to be some level of innocent until proven guilty, and there needs to be some process by which we go through this to find out what happened. And I don't see issue with the way things were. This article says nothing about how it happens now. It just says there's changes. So that's the mentality of 90% of people in this country right now, is we don't actually care about what... we want our preconceived biases to be affirmed, and this article will definitely do that for you. So it's going to start taking effect in August. That means next school year. So the school year is essentially over, but it'll start next year. The Biden administration's new set of guidance overhauls Trump-era rules that in part narrowed which and how schools could investigate sex discrimination cases. That's good. You shouldn't be discriminated based on your sex. I don't think that men should be turned down for a job. I don't think women should be turned down for a job. I don't think transgender people should be turned down for a job specifically because of their sex. That's wrong. As a company or as a university, you should want the best people for the job, right? And discriminating based on sex doesn't allow for the best person to get the job. So that is a just law. I think that's a good thing. President Joe Biden in his 2020 presidential campaign vowed to overturn the changes made under Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. I actually kind of liked her a lot because she wanted to abolish the Department of Education at the federal level, and I think that's a great thing. I don't think that schools in Spring Hill, Florida should function the same way they do in New York City. We have gotten dumber and worse at everything since the Federal Department of Education has been created. And I don't know if it's the trillions yet, but it's hundreds of billions of dollars that could be paying teachers more, could be creating better situations for kids in schools. But what do I know? I'm just a strength coach. The new rules expand the definition of sexual assault and harassment, which is fine depending on what that definition is. This means schools could investigate more cases of discrimination, abuse, or harassment filed by people on school campuses under the scope of the new law. That's fair. You're going to investigate it. I don't think there's anything wrong with an investigation as long as there's due process and the assumption of innocence until proven guilty. That's, I think, where the issue is going to become here. College student survivors will no longer be required to attend live hearings or go through cross-examinations. I don't know that I'm a fan of that. And people will be given the right to prompt and equitable grievance procedures. There's that rule. There's that word. The equitable thing. Life is not equitable. Prompt and equal grievance procedures. Yes, this equitable leaves way too much room for things that shouldn't be there. So not a fan of the way that's worded, but again, I'm a strength coach, not a lawmaker. LGBTQ students, LGBTQ plus students will be guaranteed protection under the law if they are discriminated against for their gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, this is where things get kind of hairy, right? Because earlier in this video we talked about, or this episode, we talked about how sports are seen as a educational opportunity. How do we go through this now, right? And I'll keep reading. Pregnant and parenting students who might receive unwanted sexual attention, shame, or punishment at schools will also be granted more protections from sex discrimination and the admissions process and on campus. That's fine. I don't have issue with that at all. You're pregnant or you're a parent, that shouldn't bar you from getting into university. And to be completely honest, I don't know that happens. But if it does, then good. It's a good thing. These final regulations build on a legacy of Title IX by clarifying that all our nation's students can access schools that are safe, welcoming, and respect their rights. All right, U.S. Secretary Miguel Cardona. All right, so this is what I want to focus on here. LGBTQ students, Biden's Title IX update stipulates protections from sex discrimination based on gender identity for the first time. Right, so I think when it comes to getting into school or being believed and going through the process of sexual harassment claims and things like that, I don't think that's a bad thing. When it comes to sports, I think it's a very bad thing because now this muddies the waters so much. You just had governing bodies of these sports finally stand up and say, we're not going to allow trans athletes. We're going to wait some time and we're going to basically create trans categories, which is great, and that's where everything should go. But now you've muddied the waters because the federal government is now telling the NCAA you cannot discriminate based on somebody's sexual identity, which changes everything. This is important here. The Biden administration did not rule on whether transgender and non-binary students can participate on the sports teams that aligned with their gender. But did you? You know what I mean? You did. The administration released a proposed rule on April 2023 that said schools and colleges largely could not ban non-binary and transgender students from sports teams in the new Title IX rules. So, without specifically stating that you cannot keep trans athletes from competing with women, they essentially have said you cannot ban trans athletes from competing with women. Now, what does this mean? This means that young girls are now going to have to compete with young men for scholarships, right? And to talk about the trans issue right now is well beyond the scope of what this specific podcast episode is about. I will link in the description. I wrote an article about trans athletes competing with women about a year ago, probably now. I'll link that in the description. But all the evidence is there. Men, or biological men, should not be competing against biological women in any of these sports. They have total advantage in many ways, right? The grip strength of the average man is infinitely higher than the grip strength of the average female. Now, it doesn't mean that there aren't women who are stronger than men out there. That means that the average man is significantly stronger than even most of the strongest women. It is what it is. I saw a quote or a stat, this was years ago. Your average 35-year-old man can throw a baseball faster than the top 5% of women. Like, that, and I'm not talking about like a baseball coach. I'm talking about the fat accountant that sits on his couch and watches TV and drinks beer all night can still throw a ball faster than probably 70, 80% of all women. I said top 5%. I meant 70 to 80% of all women. The top 5% could probably throw faster than that guy because there are some girls that can throw some heat. But this, like I said, muddies the water. I think this was a cowardly move by the Biden administration. I think they're not seeing the writing on the wall, and people aren't going to put up with this. I am a girl dad, a quote-unquote girl dad. I have a little girl. She is fearless, and she does all the physical stuff. She'll be a year old tomorrow. Wow, this year's gone by so fast. She's been climbing on things for 5 months now. She's been walking since she was slightly over 7 months. She slides down off of our bed, which is like waist height, lands, walks around, crawls up the stairs for the past 5 months. Like, she's nuts. I truly think she's going to be an athlete. If she's not, that's fine. I want her to do what she wants to do, but she comes across as having some very athletic qualities right now. And it would be a shame to have her lose spots to young boys, right? At a young age or an old age, whenever it is. It would be heartbreaking to see that happen. I would be a very upset father. And then to have to not only compete against, but play with young biological men. I think this entire thing should be seen as a crime against humanity, because that's what it is. This is the muddying of the waters. It is the, speaking untruth into truth. And it's awful, and it's gonna hurt young women and young girls. And like, who are these young girls going to look up to? You know what I mean? If women's sports become overridden with men, and it will happen, this will open the door for it. I think this is going to be awful for the developing minds of young girls, not having any heroes to look up to, thinking that no matter what happens, a man is going to step in her way. Like, this is awful all the way around, right? So without explicitly stating that women have to compete against men who think that they're women, the Biden administration has said women have to compete against men who think they're women, because sports are seen as an educational program in the eyes of the federal government. And if these universities want to maintain that sweet federal cash, they've got to let these men compete against these women. And it's sad, and it's horrible, and it is tragic. I'm going to leave it at there before I say some things that'll get me in trouble. But it's frustrating as a father to a young daughter to see shit like this happen. It really is. And it's gross. It's awful. The Biden administration should be ashamed, and the people cheering this should be ashamed. Women need to be up in arms about this. If you want this to change, if you want opportunities for your young daughters, you need to be on the front lines of this, being as loud as humanly possible, saying absolutely not. Just like those young girls up, and I think it was Ohio last week, throwing the shot put, just refused to compete because they had to compete against a boy. Be like those girls. That's it. I'm going to shut it down there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Give us a like, subscribe, share it, do all the fun stuff, all the important stuff. Go check out the books, Dynamic Effort Method for Athletes. I'll link in the description. Simple Strength. I'll link in the description. Check out that article that I wrote a year ago about women competing against biological males and whether or not it's fair. Hint, it's not. And like I said, I got a couple, hopefully more weeks in me before everything really picks up, and we'll try to push out a few more episodes before then. But I hope everybody has a great weekend or week. God, it's Monday. Hope everybody has a great week. Hope everybody learned something. I hope you're mad, and if you are mad, I hope you're vocal. See you next time.